Darkness and apprehension enveloped Delhi's night sky. It was late December in 1299, and an unprecedented scenario was unfolding just beyond the capital's northern defenses. Soldiers on the ramparts peered into the gloom, their hands trembling on their lances. What met their gaze sent shivers down their spines. Countless campfires, stretching across the horizon, flickered like a fallen constellation. The Mongols had arrived. A boy pointed at the distant flames, his innocent voice cutting through the tension as his mother instinctively drew him closer. "Who are they, mother?" he asked. She remained silent, her throat constricted by fear, for everyone in Delhi knew precisely who they were: the Mongols. For 7 decades, that very word conjured a curse, a prayer, a death sentence all at once. No military force on earth had managed to halt their advance. From the Pacific to Vienna's gates, from Russia's frozen steppes to Persia's scorching deserts, the Mongol Empire had decimated everything in its path. Baghdad, the zenith of Islamic learning, had burned for weeks. Libraries, housing centuries of knowledge, were tossed into the Tigris, the water turning black with ink. Historians estimate 40 million lives were lost under Mongol expansion, with entire nations vanishing. The formidable Khwarezmian Empire was so utterly annihilated that most people today have never even heard of it. In Europe, mere rumors of Mongol scouts incited panic among monarchs and fervent prayers from common folk. When the Mongols obliterated a Hungarian army at the Battle of Mohi in 1241, it was a swift, decisive defeat. 65,000 European knights and soldiers were butchered in a single afternoon, while the Mongols incurred only around 200 casualties. Now, they stood 10 kilometers from Delhi's heart, India's grandest metropolis. 10 kilometers, approximately 6 miles for those following along. That's the distance between downtown Manhattan and LaGuardia Airport, or the White House and Bethesda. It's a negligible distance, a mere morning's ride on horseback. Within the palace, Sultan Alauddin Khalji stood before a map, his jaw so tightly clenched his teeth ached. His generals, faces ashen, surrounded him. From outside, the sounds of the city descending into pandemonium were audible. Refugees pouring through the gates from Punjab brought harrowing tales. Villages reduced to ash, men impaled on stakes, women and children enslaved. Markets emptied as merchants fled, and the price of grain had tripled in a week. Temples and mosques overflowed with people pleading for deliverance. Yet here's the crucial question I want you to consider as we delve into this narrative. Could Delhi withstand what no other city had? Would the irresistible force of the Mongol Empire finally encounter an unyielding obstacle? Or would Delhi become just another entry on the endless tally of cities conquered by the Mongol hordes? I won't reveal the answer just yet, because the true narrative, the human story of bravery, sorrow, and agonizing decisions, is far more compelling than any straightforward victory or loss. Before we reach that point, before we stand on that battlefield and witness the clash of 2 formidable armies, we must grasp who these individuals were and why this moment held such monumental significance. So let me transport you back 70 years to the genesis of it all, to a man who would forever reshape the world and set in motion the events that would culminate in his armies reaching Delhi's gates. His name was Temujin, though history remembers him as Genghis Khan. In 1206, he united the Mongol tribes under his banner, initiating a campaign of conquest that would eclipse the feats of Alexander the Great or Julius Caesar. However, what most people fail to comprehend about Genghis Khan is that he wasn't merely a brutal warlord who triumphed through indiscriminate violence. He was a strategic genius who revolutionized warfare, his innovations still studied in military institutions. The Mongol army was more than just a fighting force, it was a machine of terrifying efficiency and groundbreaking tactics. Every soldier was a cavalryman, capable of riding for days without respite, sleeping in the saddle, and firing arrows backward at full gallop. They employed a decimal system of organization, groups of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, facilitating rapid communication and adaptable strategies. Extensive use of scouts and spies allowed them to gather intelligence months before an attack. They used flags and torches for signaling across vast distances. Masters of psychological warfare, they instilled terror through massacres, leading many cities to surrender without a fight. But their most devastating tactic, the one that shattered army after army, was known as the feigned retreat. Allow me to elaborate on this, as it will be vital to understanding what transpires later at the Battle of Kili. Imagine you're a medieval commander, your army meticulously arrayed in battle formation, shields locked, spears poised. The Mongols initiate an assault on your position, an overwhelming rush of yelling cavalry. You steel yourself for the clash. Yet abruptly, the Mongols disengage. They're retreating, fleeing. Your troops erupt in cheers. Victory. Pursue them. Slaughter the cowards. So you do. Your soldiers abandon their formation and chase the supposedly fleeing Mongols. And that was precisely their intent, as the Mongols were not, in fact, retreating. They were luring you from your entrenched position, spreading out your forces, shattering your order. Then, once you're spent, scattered, and exposed, the Mongol cavalry concealed on your flanks sweeps in from both sides. Suddenly, you're not pursuing defeated adversaries. You're encircled. Your demise is imminent. This stratagem proved effective against the Chinese dynasties, the Islamic empires of Central Asia, and the Europeans in Poland and Hungary. It was straightforward, brutal, and nearly impossible to counteract, even when anticipated. Because amidst the chaos of battle, when you observe your foe in flight, every instinct impels you to give chase. By the time Genghis Khan passed away in 1227, his dominion stretched from Korea to the Caspian Sea. However, his successors harbored even grander aspirations. The Mongols subdued the Jin dynasty in China by 1234. They annihilated the Abbasid Caliphate and razed Baghdad in 1258. They invaded Europe, instilling terror in monarchs and commoners alike. But then, an intriguing development occurred. In the 1260s, the Mongol Empire fragmented into 4 distinct khanates, each governed by Genghis Khan's descendants, but operating independently. There was the Yuan dynasty in China and Mongolia, the Ilkhanate in Persia and the Middle East, the Golden Horde in Russia and Eastern Europe, and the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia. It's this final entity, the Chagatai Khanate, that pertains to our narrative. Consult a map, and the issue becomes immediately apparent. The Chagatai Khanate found itself encircled on 3 fronts by other Mongol powers. To its west lay the Golden Horde. To its southwest was the Ilkhanate. To its east was the Yuan dynasty. If the Chagatai Khan sought to broaden his territory, he couldn't assail his fellow Mongols without instigating a civil war that would devastate all involved. So, where could he expand? Only one direction remained, south, towards India. By the late 13th century, the Chagatai Khanate was under the dominion of Dua Khan. Historical accounts portray him as ambitious, sagacious, and power-hungry. He perceived India as an opportunity. The land was unbelievably affluent, brimming with gold, spices, silk, and precious gems. The various kingdoms and sultanates were fragmented, perpetually warring amongst themselves. Crucially, they had never experienced the full force of a Mongol invasion. Certainly, there had been border incursions, skirmishes in the Punjab, and reconnaissance attacks that had been repelled. But a true invasion, a full-scale conquest attempt with total commitment of resources and the finest Mongol generals, had never materialized. Dua Khan decided it was time, but he wasn't going to lead this invasion himself. He intended to dispatch someone even more significant, his son, Kutlu Khawaja. Kutlu Khawaja understood this wouldn't be a mere plundering raid. It would be a conquest, a campaign to permanently annex India to the Mongol Empire. A raid against them was a man equally ambitious, equally ruthless, and equally prepared to do whatever it took to triumph. His name was Alauddin Khalji, and he ascended to the Sultanate of Delhi in 1296 through one of the most ruthless betrayals in Indian history. His uncle, Jalaluddin Khalji, was the previous sultan. Alauddin was his nephew and a trusted military leader. One day, Alauddin invited his uncle to a banquet to commemorate a recent military triumph. Upon Jalaluddin's arrival, Alauddin had him assassinated right there at the feast. Then, Alauddin proceeded to Delhi, eliminated anyone who might oppose his rule, and proclaimed himself Sultan. Now, I understand what you're likely thinking. This individual sounds like a monster. And you're not mistaken. Alauddin was brutal, paranoid, and utterly merciless in eradicating anyone he deemed a threat. He prohibited alcohol throughout his domain, not for religious motives, but because he believed inebriated nobles were more prone to conspire against him. He established a vast espionage network to report on potential plotters. He regulated grain prices so rigorously that he could afford to upkeep a massive standing army. He was, by no measure, a benevolent man. But here's the crucial point, and this is where history becomes intricate. Alauddin Khalji was also a military prodigy and arguably India's most formidable defender. He grasped that the Mongol threat was existential. If Delhi fell, if the Mongol Empire subjugated India, it would signify the destruction of everything he had built and the deaths of millions. Consequently, Alauddin undertook something revolutionary. He established India's first large-scale professional standing army. Previously, Indian leaders relied on feudal levies, troops summoned from their nobility who weren't always reliable. Alauddin ended this practice. He remunerated soldiers directly from the royal treasury, approximately 234 tankas annually for a cavalryman with one horse, and an extra 78 tankas if they maintained 2 mounts. This sum may seem modest until one considers that, according to the historian Farisha, he supported 475,000 cavalry. Even if that figure is inflated, it still represents an astonishingly vast army. He instituted the dog system, which involved branding horses to prevent soldiers from merely borrowing them for inspections. He also devised the hulia system, which entailed comprehensive written descriptions of each soldier to deter false enlistments for pay. He ensured his forces were supremely equipped with the finest available weaponry. This included swords crafted in Damascus, composite bows capable of piercing armor, war elephants designed to disrupt cavalry charges, and catapults for siege warfare. He rigorously drilled his generals, promoting individuals based on merit rather than aristocratic lineage. Essentially, Alauddin transformed the Delhi Sultanate into a formidable war machine, specifically engineered for battling the Mongols. He would need every bit of that preparation, as the Mongols had already been testing Delhi's defenses. In 1296 and 1297, Mongol contingents had launched incursions across the border into Punjab. They had been repelled, though just barely. Everyone understood these were merely reconnaissance missions, assessing Delhi's defensive capacity and gathering intelligence for the inevitable full-scale invasion. Before continuing, if you're enjoying this narrative, please consider hitting the like button. It genuinely assists with the algorithm more than you might realize and signals your interest in further deep dives into forgotten historical conflicts and _2_ scenarios. Also subscribe. Many more compelling stories like this one are on the horizon. Now back to our tale. The individual who spearheaded Delhi's defense during these initial border skirmishes was a general named Zafar Khan. Here, our story truly deepens, for Zafar Khan represents one of history's overlooked luminaries. He was a man whose exceptional courage should have immortalized him in legend, yet he was subsequently expunged from official records, a detail we will explore later. In 1297, Zafar Khan confronted a Mongol army of roughly 20,000 soldiers at a location called Jaran Manjur. The Mongols were supremely confident. They had an unbroken record of success in major battles within this region, expecting to effortlessly overwhelm the Indian forces as they had all previous adversaries. Instead, Zafar Khan utterly annihilated them. 20,000 Mongol soldiers were either killed or captured. It marked a stunning defeat for an army that considered itself invincible. The following year, in 1298, the Mongols captured a stronghold named Sivastan in Sindh. They believed they had established a permanent foothold in Indian territory. Zafar Khan marched his army day and night, encircled the fort, and not only vanquished the Mongol garrison, but also captured their commander alive, bringing him back to Delhi in chains. These triumphs achieved two crucial outcomes. Firstly, they demonstrated that the Mongols were not supernatural warriors, but mere mortals who could bleed and perish like anyone else. Secondly, and significantly, they absolutely infuriated Dua Khan. The Chagatai ruler could not stomach these defeats. His pride forbade it. More importantly, he understood that if news of Mongols being routed by Indian forces spread throughout Central Asia, it would ignite resistance everywhere. The aura of Mongol invincibility, a cornerstone of their psychological warfare, would be shattered. Consequently, Dua Khan made a decisive choice. No more scattered raids, no more limited engagements. He resolved to crush Delhi decisively. To lead this invasion, he selected his own son, Kutlu Koja, a prince of royal lineage, a commander with a proven battlefield record, and a man driven to prove his worth. In late 1299, Kutlu Koja mustered his army somewhere in Central Asia. The precise size remains a point of contention among historians. Some accounts assert 200,000 cavalry, a figure that appears exaggerated. More credible estimations place the force at between 50,000 and 60,000 elite Mongol warriors. However, even 50,000 is a terrifying number when referring to Mongol cavalry. Soldiers who had trained for war their entire lives, capable of covering 100 miles in a day, and renowned for their deadly accurate archery while riding at full gallop. This army began its arduous march south towards India. They traversed the formidable Hindu Kush Mountains, that brutal range that has thwarted countless invaders throughout history. They then passed through the Khyber Pass, the narrow gateway connecting Central Asia and the Indian subcontinent. They swept across Punjab. And this is where events become truly captivating. When the Mongols typically invaded, they would usually ransack every city they encountered, torching, looting, taking captives, and stocking up on provisions. However, Kutlu Koja prohibited all such actions. He instructed his soldiers to bypass urban areas, avoid assaulting fortifications, and leave settlements undisturbed. This extended journey lasted half a year, 6 months of traversing hostile territory without seizing any city's worth of spoils. Why? Because Kutlu Koja desired his army to be revitalized and at its full capacity upon reaching Delhi. He didn't want his troops burdened by stolen goods or worn out from siege warfare. This impending conflict was to be an all-or-nothing struggle, a single decisive confrontation that would determine India's destiny. The Mongol army would have one objective and one alone: Delhi itself, the capital, the epicenter of Indian resistance. This city, if it fell, would open up the entire subcontinent to Mongol dominance. News of the Mongol advance traveled faster than the army itself. Fleeing southward, refugees brought increasingly terrifying accounts with each retelling. The Mongols purportedly numbered 1 million men. Some claimed their horses breathed fire, and they consumed children's flesh. Panic spread across northern India like wildfire. In the cities of Mulan and Samana, Alauddin's generals prepared their forces, anticipating an initial Mongol assault. But Kutlu Koja ignored these cities entirely. He had no interest in ancillary battles. He was heading directly for Delhi. And when he arrived, when his army finally ceased its march and established a camp at a location called Kili, merely 10 kilometers north of Delhi's walls, the entire city collectively held its breath. This was the dreaded moment. The Mongol Empire, the power that had conquered half the known world, stood at their gates. Within Delhi, chaos reigned supreme. The streets were congested with refugees from the Punjab, families who had abandoned everything to escape south. Markets faced food shortages as the Mongols had severed trade routes, causing prices to soar. Temples and mosques were overflowing with people seeking divine intercession. On the city walls, soldiers gazed at the distant Mongol encampment, wondering if they would witness the next sunrise. In the palace, Alauddin Khalji confronted the most pivotal decision of his existence. His generals advised him to send an envoy to negotiate, offer tribute, and gain time. Perhaps the Mongols would accept payment and depart, as other kingdoms had survived by appeasing them. But Alauddin's chief confidant, Alawul Mul, stated it more forthrightly. Quote, 3. Alauddin considered these arguments, then responded with a resounding, quote, 4. What I find compelling about this moment is Alauddin's shrewdness. He comprehended the dangers. He knew the Mongols had never failed in a major campaign. He knew that if he rode out to confront them in battle, there was a very real possibility of his demise. Yet he grasped something his advisors did not. Displaying weakness now, retreating behind Delhi's ramparts, or paying tribute like a frightened vassal, would be perceived by every noble and governor from the Deccan to Bengal as a sign of his vulnerability. Within a month, revolts would erupt throughout his empire. Local rulers would declare independence. His empire would fragment, and then the Mongols wouldn't even need to conquer Delhi, as it would self-destruct. So Alauddin made his choice. He would ride forth and face the Mongols in open combat. He would bring the full might of Delhi's army to the field at Kili, and he would either achieve victory or perish in the attempt. Before departing, however, he made meticulous arrangements. He entrusted Alawul Mul with the defense of Delhi itself, handing him the keys to the royal palace and treasury. Alauddin declared. He also ordered the Badin Gate on the eastern flank of the city to remain open. If the battle went poorly, if his army was annihilated, he desired a clear escape route towards the Doab region where he might be able to regroup. These were not the actions of a man assured of victory. Rather, they were the actions of a man who understood he might be riding to his death. But he was determined to proceed regardless, because occasionally in history, the stakes are so immense that one must take a gamble, even when the odds are stacked against them. Meanwhile, Gudul Khwaza faced his own set of challenges. He dispatched a formal challenge to Delhi, demanding that Alauddin himself come out and fight. When Zafar Khan, the very general who had twice before defeated the Mongols, rode out to deliver Delhi's reply, Gutlaja refused even to parley with him. "I did not come here to fight generals," the Mongol prince proclaimed. "Kings fight kings. If your sultan lacks the courage to confront me personally, instruct him to dispatch his royal standard to the battlefield, thereby confirming I am engaging with the authentic army of Delhi, not merely disposable forces." This was a brilliant psychological tactic. By publicly challenging Alauddin's bravery, Gudul Khwaja made it politically unfeasible for the Sultan to evade combat. Furthermore, by demanding Alauddin bring his personal standard, Gudul Khwaja ensured a definitive, all-or-nothing confrontation. No deceptions, no stand-ins, only genuine armies, true commanders, one decisive battle. Upon Zafar Khan's return to Delhi, he relayed these events. Within the council chamber, Alauddin's advisors reiterated their appeals for prudence. They cautioned that it was a trap, asserting that the Mongols desired open combat where they held the advantage. They advocated utilizing Delhi's fortifications, forcing a siege. However, Alauddin's decision was already made. The following morning, the Delhi army would march to Kili. That night, an unusual quiet permeated the city, broken only by the murmur of prayers. Soldiers bid farewell to their kin. Wives embraced their husbands. Parents blessed their offspring. All understood that the coming day would be unlike any other in Delhi's history. In the palace, Alauddin Khalji donned his armor by candlelight. He was 40, at the zenith of his power, a ruler who had seized the throne through force and maintained it with sheer willpower. He had quelled uprisings, conquered realms, and established an empire. Yet, the ensuing day would present his greatest challenge. As dawn's first light illuminated Delhi, the gates swung open, and the army began its northward procession towards Kili. The soldiers advanced in near silence, the only sounds being the clang of armor and the steady pulse of drums. Delhi's populace ascended to their rooftops to observe the army's departure. Some offered prayers, others wept. Everyone pondered if they would ever again behold their warriors. The Kili battlefield was a relatively flat expanse, distinguished by natural features that would significantly influence the impending battle. The Yamuna River bordered one side, while dense forest lay on the other. This configuration restricted the battlefield's width. The Mongols, who relied on expansive cavalry maneuvers and flanking assaults, would find their preferred tactics constrained. It was an opportune location for a stand. Upon the Delhi army's arrival in formation, the Mongols were already poised. Kutlu Khawaja had arranged his forces in the classic Mongol configuration: cavalry units in impeccable order, banners aloft, and horses standing perfectly still despite the thousands of riders. It must have been an intimidating spectacle. On the opposing side, Alauddin organized his army in accordance with traditional Indian military principles, incorporating adjustments derived from prior encounters with the Mongols. At the center, he positioned himself with the Royal Guard, his most skilled and loyal soldiers. Ahead of the Sultan was Akat Khan, leading 10,000 heavy cavalry tasked with absorbing the Mongols' initial assault and safeguarding Alauddin at all costs. On the left flank, Alauddin placed Nusrat Khan, with Ulugh Khan held in reserve behind him. The right flank was commanded by Zafar Khan, notably leading a diverse force that included many Hindu warriors who had joined Delhi's service. Seasoned fighters familiar with the terrain and displaying unwavering loyalty. Behind the frontline cavalry, Alauddin deployed his war elephants, colossal beasts unfamiliar in such numbers to the Mongols. Infantry and archers followed them. As the two armies confronted each other across the plain, one can only imagine the thoughts traversing the soldiers' minds. The Mongols had endured a 6-month march for this moment, traversing mountains and deserts, bypassing cities they could have plundered, all for this singular battle. They genuinely believed themselves invincible, confident their tactics were superior, and that their discipline and skill would prevail as they always had. On Delhi's side, the soldiers understood they were fighting for their lives and the lives of loved ones. Defeat meant Delhi's destruction, their families enslaved or slain, their civilization obliterated. This was not a struggle for territory or riches, but a battle for survival. The morning sun ascended, and the air grew hot and still as the armies waited. Alauddin was in no hurry to commence the battle. His strategy was to prolong the engagement, to gain time. Why? Because reinforcements were advancing from the eastern provinces. A delay of a few days would bring more troops. Moreover, the Mongols were subsisting off the land, their supply lines stretched thin after 6 months of campaigning. The longer the stalemate, the more likely they were to face food shortages and be compelled to retreat. However, Kutlu Khawaja also grasped this, recognizing the need to force a decisive battle swiftly. Consequently, the Mongols began to test Delhi's lines with minor attacks designed to provoke a response. This unfortunate turn of events marked a significant setback for Alauddin, as his meticulously crafted strategy was jeopardized by an individual's impulsive bravery. Zafar Khan, leading the right flank, observed a Mongol cavalry unit, commanded by Hijlak, persistently harassing his position. The Mongols employed their typical hit-and-run tactic, charging in, firing arrows, and then quickly retreating. This maneuver aimed to provoke the Indian forces into breaking their formation, a strategy Zafar Khan was well aware of, having encountered it in previous battles. He understood their deceptions, yet the sight of his men falling under the barrage of arrows and the Mongols' taunts ignited a furious reaction within him. Zafar Khan made a pivotal decision, one that would alter the course of the battle. Without seeking Alauddin's permission or coordinating with his fellow commanders, he commanded an assault. 5,000 cavalry under Zafar Khan's leadership surged forward, predominantly Hindu warriors, their battle cry, "10," echoing as they charged towards Hijlak's Mongol contingent. From the center of the Delhi line, Alauddin witnessed the unfolding spectacle, his heart sinking. "No," he bellowed, "Zafar Khan, halt! Return to your position!" But his pleas were in vain. The vast distance and the deafening roar of hooves and battle cries rendered his voice unheard. Zafar Khan's cavalry clashed with the Mongol unit, and for a fleeting moment it appeared successful. The Mongols seemed to falter, beginning a retreat. Zafar Khan's troops cheered, convinced the enemy was fleeing in fear. "They're running, they're terrified, pursue them, slaughter them all." And they did, chasing the retreating Mongols across the plains, covering distances of 1, 2, then 3 kilometers, venturing further and further from the main Delhi army. Then the trap sprung. The Mongol unit's retreat was a meticulously executed feint. Hijlak's forces had lured Zafar Khan's cavalry away from their defensive positions, away from the support of the primary army, into vulnerable open ground. Suddenly, from both sides, concealed Mongol cavalry units emerged and attacked. This was a classic Mongol stratagem, and Zafar Khan, despite his experience, had fallen victim to it. Within moments, 5,000 Delhi soldiers found themselves encircled by over 20,000 Mongol warriors. They were cut off, surrounded, and trapped. From the main battlefield, Alauin watched in agony. He couldn't deploy reinforcements without exposing his center to attack, nor could he abandon Zafar Khan and lose 5,000 of his elite troops. He was paralyzed. Zafar Khan, comprehending the gravity of his blunder, accepted his fate and resolved to make his death meaningful. "Form a circle," he ordered his men. "Backs together. We die here, but we die fighting." The Mongols converged from all directions. Arrows rained down incessantly, and cavalry charges came in relentless waves. Yet Zafar Khan's warriors fought with the desperate courage of men who knew their survival was impossible. They cut down hundreds of Mongol soldiers, maintaining their formation even as their numbers dwindled. Zafar Khan himself, wielding his sword with fierce intensity, struck down foe after foe. The Mongol commanders observed this heroic stand with a discernible admiration. These were not soldiers fleeing, but warriors choosing death over surrender. Kutlu Khawaja himself rode closer to witness the spectacle. He identified Zafar Khan by his ornate armor and the unwavering loyalty of his surrounding soldiers. The Mongol prince made a decision. He commanded his men to cease the attack and advanced under a white flag. Quote 16. Kutlu Khawaja proclaimed to Zafar Khan. Quote 17. This was a remarkably generous offer for the era. Zafar Khan could have survived, achieving power and prosperity. All he needed to do was betray Alauddin. The general gazed at the Mongol prince, then at his remaining men, bloodied and weary, but still defiant. He then smiled. Zafar Khan declared. He raised his sword and charged. The Mongols resumed their assault. According to the historian Isami, writing years after the event, Zafar Khan slew 5,000 Mongol soldiers before he finally fell. While this figure is almost certainly an exaggeration, no single warrior could kill so many in one battle, the sheer size of the number reflects the unparalleled ferocity of Zafar Khan's final struggle. He didn't merely die, he forged an immediate legend, a man who prioritized honor over life. Crucially, before his demise, Zafar Khan achieved one vital objective. During one of his final charges, he wounded Kutlu Khawaja. His sword or spear, the sources are unclear which, struck the Mongol prince in the shoulder, inflicting a deep, profusely bleeding wound. Kutluk Khawaja's men withdrew him from the fray and began emergency treatment. Despite being critically injured, the prince clung to life. However, this solitary injury, sustained during a desperate final stand, would ultimately determine the outcome of the entire conflict. With General Zafar Khan's forces decimated, the Mongol attention shifted to the primary Delhi army. This was the true test. The formidable Mongol cavalry crashed into the heart of Alauddin's formation. War elephants bellowed and charged, their tusks tipped with blades, carrying archers who rained arrows down upon the Mongol ranks. Horses shrieked in terror at the sight of these colossal beasts, a phenomenon the Mongols had encountered before, but never in such overwhelming numbers. The heavily armored Delhi cavalry formed an iron wall around their sultan. The battle raged for many hours. Akkad Khan, leading the troops facing Alauddin's position, perished defending his ground. Nusrat Khan and Ulugh Khan, on the flanks, repelled every Mongol advance, preserving the battle line. Alauddin himself fought, his sword stained crimson with blood, inspiring his men through his sheer presence. The Mongols were witnessing something they seldom experienced, an undefeated army. The Delhi soldiers weren't deserting their posts, they weren't succumbing to panic. They maintained their positions with an unyielding resolve born of utter despair. As the sun dipped below the horizon on that inaugural day of combat, both armies withdrew, utterly exhausted. Thousands lay dead on both sides. The wounded littered the battlefield, pleading for water, for aid, for the release of death from their torment. That night, within the Delhi encampment, Alauddin's remaining generals presented him with urgent counsel. "Sultan, we must retreat. We have lost Zafar Khan. We have lost Akkad Khan. We have sacrificed thousands of our finest soldiers. We must fall back to Delhi, utilize the city walls, force them into a protracted siege. This is our only viable option." Alauddin listened intently. Then, with quiet but absolute certainty, he declared, "If I advance, it will only be forward. Tomorrow, we resume the fight." In the Mongol camp, Kutlug Khawaja lay on a cot, a fever setting in as his wound grew infected. His generals gathered around him, debating their next move. The prince required rest and medical attention. They advocated for a withdrawal, a regrouping, and a renewed assault once he had recovered. But Kutlug Khawaja refused. "We fight tomorrow," he asserted. "We are too close to victory to halt now." Thus, both armies, bruised and bleeding, settled in for a protracted night. Soldiers attempted to sleep, but were disturbed by the cries of the injured. Fires flickered across both camps. Everyone understood that the coming day would usher in further death. However, the second day of battle transpired differently. There were minor skirmishes and probing attacks, but no significant confrontation. Both sides appeared to be anticipating something. Alauddin awaited reinforcements from the east. Kutlug Khawaja hoped for his fever to subside and his strength to return. The third day was even more subdued. A strange, unsettling quiet pervaded the atmosphere. Two immense armies sat less than a mile apart, observing each other, yet refraining from combat. In the Mongol camp, Kutlug Khawaja's condition worsened. The infection from his wound spread poison throughout his bloodstream. He was barely conscious, drifting between consciousness and feverish delirium. His generals convened an emergency meeting. The prince was dying. Without proper medical care in a proper city, he would perish within weeks. Their supplies were dwindling. The 6-month march had exhausted their resources. Local villagers had either concealed or fled with their provisions. Delhi's reinforcements were drawing nearer each day. For the first time in 70 years, a Mongol army contemplated retreat. On the night of the third day, under the cloak of darkness, the Mongol army began its withdrawal. They gave no announcement, sent no heralds. They simply packed their camp, mounted their horses, and rode north. The operation was carried out with such stealth and precision that Delhi scouts remained unaware of the events until dawn. When the sun rose on the fourth day, the Delhi soldiers gazed across the battlefield to an empty expanse. The Mongols were gone. For a moment, confusion reigned. Then, a cry erupted. "They've left! We've won!" The cheer of victory spread like wildfire through the army. Soldiers rejoiced, embraced, and wept with overwhelming relief. They had endured. Delhi had endured. The seemingly invincible Mongol Empire had been halted. Yet, when the news reached Alauddin, sitting in his tent, engrossed in a map, he offered no smile, no celebration. He peered north towards the dust clouds signaling the Mongol army's retreat. And he uttered softly, quote, 25. He was both correct and incorrect. The Mongols did return, but they would never again approach Delhi with such proximity to conquest. Now, this is where the narrative takes a profoundly tragic turn. One that truly illustrates the complexities of history. and how often saviors of nations are overlooked, while those who issue commands receive all the acclaim. Consider Zafar Khan, that individual who bravely plunged into the Mongol ambush, fighting valiantly until his last breath, gravely injuring the Mongol prince, and arguably, in doing so, rescuing Delhi. One might assume he would be celebrated as a national emblem. You'd imagine monuments erected in his honor, his name taught to schoolchildren, and historians chronicling his ultimate defiant stand. But you'd be mistaken. Upon his return to Delhi, Sultan Alauddin showed not gratitude but fury towards Zafar Khan. The general had defied explicit commands, launching an unauthorized assault. He had jeopardized the entire strategic plan by breaking formation. While his ultimate sacrifice proved pivotal, and without his wounding of Kutlu Khawaja, the Mongols potentially could have claimed victory, Alauddin perceived it differently. He saw a subordinate who disregarded orders, and in Alauddin's realm, such insubordination, even if heroically motivated, was intolerable. If one general could flout directives and receive commendation, the very fabric of military discipline would unravel. Therefore, Alauddin rendered a verdict that I personally find both strategically justifiable and profoundly tragic from a human perspective. He decreed that Zafar Khan's legacy be expunged from all official records. The court chronicler, Amir Khusro, in his work, quote, 26, which meticulously documented Alauddin's military campaigns, extensively discusses the Battle of Kili, lauds the Sultan's brilliance, and describes the Mongol withdrawal. Yet, Zafar Khan receives no mention whatsoever, as if his existence were an illusion. Other chronicles from Alauddin's reign similarly either omit him entirely or relegate him to a mere footnote. It was only much later, after Alauddin's demise, when the full narrative could be safely disclosed, that historians like Isami, writing decades subsequent, recorded the true events and preserved the saga of Zafar Khan's courage. By then, however, the damage was irreversible. The very populace Zafar Khan had protected had forgotten him. I find a profound injustice in this. The man dedicated his all, perished defending his city, only to be erased from history because his actions, however heroic, made his sultan appear less than absolute. Now, I'm not asserting Alauddin was incorrect from a purely pragmatic angle. Maintaining order within an army is paramount. If generals can disregard commands at whim, you end up with chaos, not a cohesive fighting force. However, surely there must be scope for acknowledging exceptional bravery, even when accompanied by a breach of protocol. Zafar Khan merited greater recognition. Meanwhile, Kutlu Khawaja and his forces were retreating towards Central Asia. The prince's condition steadily worsened. The injury inflicted by Zafar Khan was slowly consuming him. Medieval medical practices simply lacked the means to treat such a deep, infected wound. Without antibiotics or advanced surgical techniques, hope and prayer were the only recourse, invariably leading to death. Kutlu Khawaja succumbed somewhere along the arduous trek back to his homeland, likely within the frontiers of modern-day Afghanistan or Pakistan. His remains were returned to his father, Dua Khan. Upon learning of his son's death, the invasion's failure, and the Mongols' forced retreat from Delhi, Dua Khan was reportedly engulfed in a furious rage. Yet he also gleaned a valuable lesson. India would not be easily subjugated. The Delhi Sultanate possessed formidable leadership, a potent military, and an unwavering resolve to resist. This was unlike conquering China or Persia, where a single decisive victory could shatter all opposition. This would demand a protracted, brutal campaign with no certainty of success. Nevertheless, characteristic of the Mongols, they attempted again. In 1303, a mere 4 years after the Battle of Kili, another Mongol army reinvaded. This time, they actually reached Delhi, laying siege to the city for 2 months. Alauddin, along with his court and army, found himself confined within. Provisions dwindled, ailments spread, and the populace began to panic. But Alauddin remained steadfast. He understood that the Mongols could not sustain an indefinite siege. They lacked a supply infrastructure within India, subsisting off the land, meaning they would exhaust their resources before Delhi did. And that is precisely what transpired. After 8 weeks, the Mongol army withdrew, having achieved nothing but wasted time and lost lives. Then, in 1305, Aladdin dispatched one of his generals, Malik Kafur, to confront another Mongol incursion at a location known as Amroha. This engagement resulted in a conclusive victory for Delhi. 8,000 Mongol soldiers perished, and the remaining forces fled back across the border. And in 1306, yet another Mongol contingent attempted an invasion but was vanquished by Delhi's armies at the Ravi River. Following this, the Mongols ceased their large-scale invasion attempts. They still launched occasional raids, small-scale incursions into border territories, but the era of massive campaigns aimed at conquering India was over. Why? What had shifted? I believe the explanation is quite straightforward. The Mongols had constructed their empire on a reputation for invincibility. When they appeared at your gates, your options were limited. Confronted with their advance, one faced 2 alternatives: immediate capitulation, potentially preserving one's status as a subordinate state, or resistance, leading to absolute obliteration. Most regions chose submission, having heard the harrowing tales of cities that dared to defy them. Yet, Delhi, uniquely, had resisted and prevailed, not just once, but on multiple occasions. Each time the Mongols failed to subjugate Delhi, their fearsome reputation suffered a blow. The news spread. If Delhi could overcome them, perhaps others could too. Their aura of invincibility dissolved. Without this potent psychological weapon, the Mongols were reduced to merely another formidable, skilled army, but no longer viewed as insurmountable. Now, I wish to reflect on why the Mongols were unsuccessful in India, despite their widespread triumphs elsewhere. I believe these reasons offer crucial insights into thwarting a seemingly unstoppable force. Firstly, leadership. Aladdin was an exceptionally brilliant military strategist. He grasped the nuances of logistics, tactics, prolonged engagements, and the vital importance of maintaining a rigorously trained army. He wasn't a feudal lord relying on untrained peasant militias. He had forged a war machine specifically tailored to confront the Mongols, and it proved effective. Secondly, military restructuring. Aladdin's innovations, such as the dog and chera systems, might appear minor, but they were profoundly impactful. By curbing corruption and ensuring his soldiers were properly trained and equipped, he maintained an army quality that could rival the Mongols. Thirdly, strategic defense. Aladdin made no efforts to conquer Central Asia. He avoided overextending his forces. Instead, he established a network of fortifications along the northwest frontier, prioritizing defense. He understood that he didn't need to dismantle the Mongol Empire. He merely needed to make the conquest of India more arduous than it was worth. Fourthly, adaptation. Delhi's forces learned from their adversaries. They integrated some Mongol cavalry tactics, meticulously studied their strategies, and developed countermeasures for their feigned retreats and other signature maneuvers. However, I also believe there's another element, something less tangible. The populace of Delhi, from the Sultan to the common soldier, recognized they were fighting for their very existence. When the Mongols invaded China or Persia, many inhabitants likely thought, perhaps these new rulers won't be worse than the old ones. Perhaps we can just lay low, and life will continue. But in Delhi, everyone understood the profound implications of Mongol conquest: devastation, massacre, the end of their civilization. Consequently, they fought with a desperate resolve that the Mongols had seldom encountered elsewhere, and that made all the difference. Superior tactics can be invaluable, but if your adversary is willing to perish rather than yield, if they will stand their ground against all odds, eventually, superior courage can triumph over superior skill. Now I pose a question that I genuinely want you to contemplate. Please share your insights in the comments, as I'm truly interested in your perspective. We remember the Mongol Empire as a monumental historical power, and rightly so. They reshaped the world. Yet, we tend to commemorate the conquerors more than those who halted their advance. Why is this? Why is Genghis Khan's name universally recognized, but not Alauddin Khalji's? Why can most Americans recount tales of Mongol invasions of Europe, but remain unaware of the Battle of Kili? Is it because we are drawn to narratives of triumph and conquest rather than those of defense and survival? Or is there another explanation? Please let me know your thoughts in the comments. This is a topic I frequently ponder when studying history. The legacy of the Battle of Kili extended far beyond simply repelling a single invasion. Alauddin's victory granted him the breathing room necessary to consolidate his dominion. He proceeded to conquer vast territories in southern India, expanding the Delhi Sultanate to its greatest extent. He enacted economic reforms, curbed inflation, and ushered in a period of relative stability that endured for years. None of this would have been feasible had the Mongols triumphed at Kili. Delhi would have been annihilated, the Sultanate would have crumbled, and the entire trajectory of Indian history would have been altered. Consider the cascading effects. If the Mongols had conquered India in 1299, they would have commanded a continuous empire stretching from the Pacific to the Indian Ocean. The immense wealth of India would have fueled further Mongol expansion. Who knows? Perhaps they would have attempted to conquer Europe again. Perhaps they would have pivoted south towards Southeast Asia. The geopolitical landscape of the entire medieval world would have been fundamentally different. But it didn't occur. A single battle, a sultan's decision to confront the enemy directly instead of sheltering behind defenses, a general's insubordinate charge that cost him his life but also wounded the enemy prince, an army's unwavering refusal to break and flee. These factors collectively changed the course of history. And I find that profoundly beautiful, in a tragic sense. The past isn't predestined. It's a tapestry woven from the decisions of individuals facing immense pressure. These individuals, despite their fear and uncertainty, acted on what they believed was right. Alauddin Khalji, a ruthless dictator who seized power through violence, also saved countless lives by rejecting surrender to the Mongol forces. Zafar Khan, in defiance of command, met his end, yet his demise inflicted a severe injury upon Kutlu Khawaja, likely preserving Delhi. History, like humanity, is intricate, which is precisely why its study is so compelling. Before concluding, I want to share a final insight that, in my opinion, contextualizes this entire narrative. In contemporary Central Asia, within the nations that once formed the Mongol Empire, Genghis Khan is lionized as a national hero and founding father, who unified the various tribes and forged the largest empire historically. This view is valid from their viewpoint, as he was indeed a formidable leader. However, in the Middle East, particularly in regions like Iraq and Iran, Genghis Khan is portrayed as a destroyer, a barbaric figure responsible for burning cities and massacring millions. This perspective, too, is justifiable from their experience. Conversely, in India, particularly Delhi, remnants of monuments and historical accounts still honor Alauddin Khalji as the savior of India from the Mongols. The same incidents generate vastly different interpretations depending on one's vantage point. This highlights a crucial lesson about perspective and how our self-narratives influence our understanding of the world. So, what contemporary lessons can we draw from the Battle of Kili in 2024, over 7 centuries later? I believe several insights remain pertinent. Firstly, reputation often diverges from reality. The Mongols cultivated an aura of invincibility, which often served them well. Yet, when confronted by resolute and effective resistance, that reputation swiftly dissolved. In your own life, do not permit the formidable reputation of an obstacle to deter you from making an effort. Secondly, thorough preparation is paramount. Alauddin's victory wasn't merely coincidental. He dedicated years to reforming his military, strengthening defenses, and training his soldiers. When the critical moment arrived, he was prepared. Thirdly, The correct path is sometimes the most arduous. Alauddin could have pursued negotiations, paid tribute, or sidestepped conflict. While these options might have offered short-term ease and security, they would have culminated in long-term disaster. He chose the difficult route, and it yielded success. Fourthly, heroes are not always perpetually remembered. Zafar Khan, despite saving Delhi, was expunged from official records. But truth possesses a way of prevailing. Decades later, chroniclers documented his exploits. Centuries later, his story endures. If you perform an act of courage, something significant, even if unacknowledged at the time, even if those in power attempt to erase your contribution, the truth will ultimately surface. It may require years or even centuries, but it will emerge. We've explored a considerable amount in this discussion, from the rise of the Mongol Empire to the streets of Delhi in 1299. From the feigned retreat that cornered Zafar Khan to the enigmatic withdrawal of the Mongol army, from the sorrowful fate of an uncelebrated hero to the enduring impact on history. If you've stayed with me this far, I sincerely appreciate your dedication. I understand this was extensive, but I felt it was essential to fully honor this extraordinary narrative. If you enjoyed this in-depth exploration of a battle largely unknown, yet pivotal in reshaping history, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. We have a wealth of similar stories, untold battles, overlooked heroes, and pivotal moments that continue to influence our world today. And seriously, leave a comment below. Share your thoughts on Alauddin Khalji. Do you view him as India's savior or a despot who fortuitously repelled an invasion? What about Zafar Khan? Does his defiance diminish or amplify the significance of his sacrifice? I value your perspective. And here's my final request. Share this video. I am earnest in this. This story deserves public awareness. Zafar Khan deserves to be remembered. The Battle of Kili merits its place alongside Thermopylae and other battles where unwavering defense altered the course of history. So, send this to a friend who appreciates history. Post it on your social media. Help disseminate the account of the day Delhi stood firm against the Mongol Empire and emerged victorious. Because if we neglect to recount these narratives, if we fail to recall these critical junctures, they will truly vanish into oblivion. And that would be a profound tragedy. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one. And remember, history transcends mere past events. It's about comprehending who we are and how we arrived here. Each conflict, each decision, every forgotten hero contributed to the world we inhabit today. Never forget that. Peace.